Hello, everybody, and welcome to an emergency podcast of the tip of the Ice-Burgh. As you can tell, the move has happened, at least for me. The new studio is not completely set up as of yet, but we had to break in our hiatus to bring you some content because, well, some of the biggest news that could have happened early in the offseason has happened. I was asked multiple times on Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live. I mean, it was definitely asked on the last episode of that. It was asked on the penultimate episode of that of season 6, whether or not Mike Sullivan was going to be the head coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins when the season begins later this year. And my answer, because it was what I truly believed, was yes. It didn't feel like his seat was hot yet. It felt like the lowered expectations of a team that was entering year one of a rebuild, whether it be a tear down of the studs rebuild or not, it was a rebuild nonetheless. It felt like he was safe at least going into next season. Well, here's something you don't hear from podcasters very often, but you hear from me probably a little bit more than you should. I was wrong. I was wrong because the news broke yesterday that the Penguins and head coach Mike Sullivan had mutually agreed to part ways. Now, when I saw that come across my screen, I was in shock. Because this is something, and I'm sure Steelers fans can relate, that you didn't, and Pirates fans could probably relate too, I didn't expect to see, no matter how bad it had been, and we can talk about that in a second. I didn't expect to see Mike Sullivan fired. Well, I guess mutually agreed to part ways at this point of the season, at this point of his tenure. I thought that he'd be given one more opportunity with the team expectedly going back on the upswing, whether it be a little bit or a lot next season. You would expect the team is at least a little bit better, or at least constructed a little bit better. I thought Sullivan would have been given that opportunity. But again, maybe that's not what he wanted. Who actually knows? Probably just Mike Sullivan, Kyle Dubas, and a select few people that are close to both sides. But nonetheless, the result is the same. The Penguins have parted ways with Mike Sullivan. The Mike Sullivan era is over in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. When you look at Sully, we can obviously talk about how it ended because it wasn't a great ending for him. 7 straight seasons without a playoff series win, 3 straight seasons without making the postseason, and a lot of people saying that his style didn't fit this team anymore. And there were examples of that, right? There were times where you looked at them continuing to try to implement Mike Sullivan's system with a team that just isn't capable, right? When he came in with the Pittsburgh Penguins, it was speed, tenacity, good on the forecheck. For the last couple of years, they've been lacking in speed. They're one of the oldest teams in the National Hockey League over the past 3 seasons. And that tenacity just wasn't there for extended periods of time. I mean, I look back at the trade deadline of last year, before and then immediately after the Jake Gensel trade, there was no tenacity in the Pittsburgh Penguins. And I look at some other instances over the last handful of seasons where you look at it and you say, if you didn't know any better, because you know Crosby's never going to quit on Sullivan, you know Malkin's never going to quit on Sullivan, you know Letang's never going to quit on Sullivan, but if you watched from the outside looking in, there were questions of effort. And when all of that boils down to 3 consecutive missed postseasons, plus a new management group that has yet to put their stamp on the coaching staff, it reads exactly what we read yesterday, mutually agreeing to part ways. Now, you can't look at Mike Sullivan without looking at the positives. I know there's a lot of people that are kind of pseudo dancing on the grave of Mike Sullivan's tenure in Pittsburgh. But once the dust clears, even his biggest detractors will have to admit Mike Sullivan is one of, if not, and this is the camp I fall in, the best coach in the history of the Penguins. Longevity was there. Success was there. And just his ability to get the best out of certain teams was there. Yes, the Penguins have a long lineage of very successful head coaches, of big name head coaches. I mean, obviously, Badger Bob Johnson comes to mind. Obviously, Dan Bilesma in his time had some success with the Penguins. You look at, Eddie Johnston as well. But you look at what Sullivan was able to do in his 10 years as Penguins head coach. 2-time Stanley Cup champion in 2016 and 2017. 9 consecutive series wins to start his Penguins tenure. 9 consecutive. Think about how crazy that is. He won back-to-back cups And then he won a playoff series in the first round in 2018 against the Flyers. Little did we know that was going to be the end of it. But nonetheless, you can't take away what that is, which is an insane run by Mike Sullivan and the Pittsburgh Penguins. 409 regular season victories as Penguins head coach, which is, by the way, a Penguins franchise record. So while I understand the ending was not pretty, the ending was, 3 straight missed postseasons with Sidney Crosby playing at the top of his game and with Evgeny Malkin, at least the 2 seasons prior to this one, playing at a very high level as well, with Erik Karlsson on the back end. The fact that he wasn't able to sneak into the playoffs, especially the last couple of years where the East, the bottom of the East, or the middle of the East, I guess it would be, was very weak. We saw the weakest team to ever make the postseason last year in the Washington Capitals. The Penguins couldn't get in over them. This year, a little bit better, but the Penguins fell so drastically far that this ended up having to happen. So Mike Sullivan, we wish him all the best from the tip of the iceberg. His time with the Penguins is over, but we will always remember him as one of, if not the best head coaches in the organization's history. And I would not be surprised if he has a job. Well, maybe he waits a little bit, because maybe one of these teams in the postseason ends up looking for a new head coach, and that's where Sully finds himself. But he's going to have a job next year. If he wants it, he will have a job, because as everybody always says, even if Mike Sullivan's not doing well in Pittsburgh, even if it's run stale in the Penguins locker room, whether or not that's the message or whether or not that's just his time as coach, he's still one of the best head coaches in hockey. So he will find a job, and he will probably find success in that new job. But what's next for the Penguins? Well, as we learned yesterday, according to Kyle Dubas in his press conference, it's going to be a completely new staff. Clean slate for the new guy coming in. He said that's the only fair way to do this, is to let the other coaches whose contracts were up at the end of the season walk away, and they've been told that they can seek other employment. They're looking for a clean slate behind the Penguins bench. Dubas expects a coaching hire in June, which means we do have a little bit of time here to kind of figure out who the best options are. But the one thing that we will not be seeing, and I had to bite my tongue on this one, because as soon as the Sullivan news came out, I said, hey, obviously, I feel like Kirk McDonald is going to be a guy that gets some consideration here. Whether or not he's a favorite is a different question. But I think he'll get some consideration, because he's the guy who was coaching the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins that had Rutger McGroarty all season and kind of shepherded that growth, that had Ville Koivunen in his first season in North America, and he shepherded that growth, who had Sergei Murashov in Wilkes-Barre Scranton whenever he was up at that level. I thought he's a shoo-in. But obviously, bowing out 2-0 to the Lehigh Valley Phantoms for a second consecutive postseason didn't help his case. And that's the one person that we got ruled out. So we know it's not going to be Mike Sullivan this fall. We know it's not going to be Kirk McDonald. But outside of that, it could really be anybody. Now, I don't think, again, this is speculation, but based on what Kyle Dubas said yesterday, it doesn't feel like it's going to be a very experienced head coach. He mentioned college coaches. He mentioned juniors coaches. He mentioned, a wide net that he's going to be looking at. And I know a lot of people immediately, sirens went off and said, David Carl, the Denver head coach? David Carl? Is he going to be somebody? I would be shocked if they didn't give him a call. This is one of the most successful NCAA head coaches in the history of that entire league. And he's somebody that's been sought after by NHL teams for multiple years. So is he an option? We'll have to wait and see. And if he is, I got to give a quick shout out to Flux CC, Matt Meager, who called this out again on the last episode of Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live. So if you're really not tuning into those, you're missing a lot of action. Matt Meager calls this out as a hot take. He says, Mike Sullivan gets fired, David Carl gets hired. It's 50% of the way there for a hot take, and that is closer than a lot of hot takes end up getting. So shout out to Matt, because I said there are hot takes, and then there's this one, and man, you're halfway there, Matt, so shout out to you. But if they bring in David Carl, that would certainly be interesting. The question has always been, does his coaching style work in the NHL? Well, if he gets to answer that question in Pittsburgh, wouldn't be the worst thing. The Penguins are going to have a very young team outside of their star 3 and maybe star 4 if Karlsson sticks around. But it's going to be a lot of youth that comes up over the next couple of years. Maybe a guy who has worked exclusively with young players could be a good person to shepherd that. Not to mention Tristan Brose. won a national championship under David Carl. So there's a little connection there as well. So we'll have to wait and see. But big news of the week is that Mike Sullivan and the Pittsburgh Penguins agree to part ways. The Sullivan era is over after 10 seasons. One other quick piece of news to note, and this is the first positive news that we've gotten in a while, because as I mentioned, Wilkes-Barre Scranton bows out of the playoffs in 2 games and they're done. Wheeling is hanging on by a thread. Last I checked, they're down 3-1 in their series. Mike Sullivan gets fired, which is never a joyous day for an organization whenever they part ways. I should stop saying fired. Whenever they part ways with a head coach, but let's call it what it is. But there is some positive news on Tuesday morning, as some reports and some rumors have indicated that the Penguins have signed forward Philip Hollander to a 2-year, $775,000 contract that begins in the 2025-26 season. As of this recording, we don't have official word on this, but there have been rumors throughout the calendar year of 2025 that Hollander, a 2018 second-round pick of the Penguins, could be looking to come back to North America. He absolutely tore things up in the Swedish Hockey League this past season, 53 points, including 26 goals in 51 games for the 24-year-old forward. He's a guy that has style. He's a guy that has flair, and he's a guy that is responsible in both ends of the ice. To kind of make it simple, he's a guy the Penguins could sorely use. At 24 years old, it's similar to Philip Tomasino. It's similar to Cody Glass. You're throwing a dart at the board on a young, talented player and hoping the fit is right. Now, this is a player that has had a storied history with the Penguins organization, like I mentioned, drafted in 2018, traded to Toronto, Kyle Dubas, connection there, traded back to Pittsburgh, and then in the Hextall era, he decided, I'm just going to go over to Europe and play in Sweden. He's had 2 pretty good years, back-to-back seasons in professional hockey over there, and now he rejoins a Penguins team that is flushed with opportunities for young players. You have what you saw from Ville Koivunen and Rutger McGroarty late in the season. I'd expect a lot more of that going into next year. So we'll see what happens this offseason. Kyle Dubas already had a lot on his plate. He had the most cap space that we have seen for a Penguins general manager in quite some time. He had more draft picks than we have seen the Penguins have in quite some time to work with. And now he has a head coaching search to get underway. So there's a lot that's going to happen in this offseason, and we will have all of it for you here at the tip of the iceberg. But thank you for tuning into this one, emergency podcast that we will do, like I said, when there's big news like this, especially something as big as Mike Sullivan parting ways with the Pittsburgh Penguins, but also something that is as significant as Philip Hollander returning to North America with the Penguins organization. We will bring you these emergency podcasts, and hopefully we can get things settled down so we're back with you on a regular basis, whether that be mid-May or the beginning of June, certainly the beginning of June, as the offseason truly gets underway following the Stanley Cup playoffs. But that's going to do it for this episode of The Tip of the Iceberg. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Iceberg. Make sure that you like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.